Hello and welcome on this cold yet beautiful Vancouver day, place we love so much. My name is Paul Tilbury, President of the NAIOP Vancouver Chapter for 2022. On behalf of my fellow board members, welcome to today's webinar. Much work has been done by NAIOP over the last year, online and when we could in-person events, educational seminars, building tours, the annual golf tournament, and of course, continuing advocacy work at all levels of government. 2022 will see the return of regular in-person breakfast sessions starting in April, as well as our Commercial Real Estate Awards Gala in June. An exciting year of programming again for you, our members. In late 2021, we released our economic impact study on the financial contribution of the commercial real estate industry here in BC. Commercial real estate is a significant employer and driver of the local economy. And this report highlighted our total contribution to Metro Vancouver GDP in excess of $15 billion, supporting 107,000 jobs, of which 40,000 are direct jobs here in Vancouver. If you haven't already had a chance, I would encourage you to review our report. Fascinating detail is available on our website at naiopvcr.com. Before we begin, I need to acknowledge our sponsors who have remained steadfastly supportive over the last 2 challenging years. They include those shown on your screens, and those supporting today's program are at the platinum level, Anthem, BD, CBRE, Colliers, Conwest, Cushman Wakefield, Grosvenor, GWL Realty Advisors, Hudson Pacific Properties, Low Tide Properties, Manulife Investment Management, Oni Group, Oxford Properties Group, Quadreal Property Group, Third Space. And at the gold level, Concert Properties, CoStar, Dayhu Group, Farrell Estates, Kaufman Calef, Lawson Lundell, McCarthy Tetra, Peterson Group, and Warrington PCI Management. And finally, at the patron level, BUK Investments, CDC Construction, Clark Wilson, Epic Investments, PC Urban Properties, Remax, and Commercial. We cannot do the work we do without the partnership and support of all of our sponsors, for which we thank them. So let us move on to today's program. We're privileged to have with us Vancouver leaders Darrell Hurst, Senior Managing Director of Brokerage Colliers, and Jason Kiselbach, Senior Vice President and Managing Director, CBRE. I am hoping that their screen will come up now as we bring them in. And I'm going to ask initially just to reflect on the last few years, and then we're going to explore both our office and industrial landscape and what we may see over the next year or so. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, Paul.
So let us start kind of reflecting back on the last year or so. It's obviously been challenging, not just on a personal employee and kind of the medical challenge we've had with all things COVID related. But Jason, give us some reflections of the last year and how it's been from a CBRE perspective and what you've seen in the marketplace.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to just start maybe with some general observations and then talk about how things played out for us business-wise over the past couple of years. So first of all, first observation was the Vancouver experience was better than most other major markets through another global calamity. And in particular in Canada, I'm sure all of us spoke to colleagues back east and we got our offices reopened sooner. It seemed like we were able to take advantage of the geography of the city we live in and be outdoors a little bit more. And we got back to business a little bit sooner than our counterparts in the other major markets in Canada. And if you talk to people in Toronto, Montreal, many of them still haven't been back to the office and are still dealing with a lot of the issues that we did. So Vancouver sort of rebounded faster and had sort of a lighter version of the issue through another tough period of time. Second thing would be, I know personally, I drastically underestimated what we were facing. March 13th, 2020, we were instructed to send everyone to go work from home. Didn't really have an end date communicated to us. Thought maybe it would be few months, the summer, something like that. And here we are almost 2 years later, still talking about it, and definitely did not expect that. But in further reflection, it's really, there's a lot of transformational changes that have happened over the past 2 years, both in our lives and work as a result of the pandemic and how we've adapted. So we sent an entire workforce to go work from home out of the office for the first time, I think, in the history of the world. And that caused us to adapt, new technologies. And now we're having these discussions about the importance of the workplace, but, what it should offer to employees to draw them in. We also had this complete shift in consumer habits, adoption of e-commerce, and also this realization of how dependent nations are on each other for supply chains and moving goods around the world. And now we're talking about, how you have to diversify your supplier group and how you manage inventory and things like that. And then there's this, the attitudes towards travel for business and large events and entertainment. And I think those are more short term, but there was a lot of big meaningful conversations, and this is a transformational thing for a generation. In terms of business, starting with 2020, again, when we had sent everyone to work from home, we were quickly on leadership calls and asked to forecast, what could the effects be on our top line revenue as a result of the pandemic, and do some worst case scenario planning and things like that, which we did. And thankfully we beat those worst case expectations in 2020, but there was definitely a big effect on the retail market and then the office market. But industrial multifamily sort of surprised us, I think, coming out of the early part of the pandemic and picked up a bit of the slack. So yeah, I think it was only about half as bad as we thought it could be in 2020. And then entering 2021, there was a ton of uncertainty that year. And, the thought was, well, can we just be flat to the year prior in terms of top line revenue? And 2021 far exceeded expectations. We continued with demand for industrial multifamily investment product. Retail and office began the rebound, and I think that was a bit sooner than some of us thought, and that was a good thing. And looking at 2022, there was a bit of a hiccup at the start of the year with Omicron. But as of, I'd say, February, the conversations I'm having with our teams and clients is more positive than it's been in the past couple of years. We're active across all asset classes. Anecdotally, there's traffic coming in the morning. It's busy downtown. There's lineups at the restaurants, and we're feeling very positive.
Okay. Thanks, Jason. Darrell, is that a similar view as you've looked over the last couple of years?
Absolutely. I would echo a number of those same comments that Jason espoused. I mean, the words that come to mind to me are not only for Vancouver, but for Canada as a whole, just how remarkably resilient we have been. And I think it would be remiss of us not to recognize some of the leaders in our healthcare sectors, both provincially and nationally, who did a remarkable job in managing the COVID situation, which is why I think we have fared better than most, certainly in North America and across the world. We look at the deaths per capita, and the US was 3 times what Canada was. So there's certainly no doubt in our mind that helped to bolster industry. And certainly in Vancouver, from a Vancouver perspective, investor sentiment remains strong. I think we saw an incredible rebound from 2020 into 2021. And I know, just speaking from the Colliers lens, nobody could have predicted that we would have, enjoyed the best year ever as a company, and in the Vancouver market, our best year ever as well. And I know a number of our clients have experienced, similar outcomes. So it's just a remarkably resilient. I think we fared similar to what we experienced coming out of the financial crisis. A very short-lived. And I know there were some heartaches, both personally and professionally, for many of us on this call. But just the resilience of our market has been something to witness.
Darrell, it's like anecdotally, and tuning into the media, a lot of the stories that we've seen over the last couple of years relative to COVID and business operators, it's been focused on the restaurant hospitality sector. and retail. In terms of vacancy in that in retail space, has kind of the anecdotal stories that we've heard played out in terms of any churn in retail?
I mean, I think what we've experienced is that there's no question that hospitality and restaurant sector were hit the hardest. I think it caused a number of those businesses who were impacted by mandated closures and limitations on capacity. In some cases, fold. In other cases, they needed to reinvent themselves. And then I look to some of what has reimagined the retail space and as well the industrial space. COVID has had an incredible impact on e-commerce. So I think that landscape has probably changed forever. But in those sectors specifically, I think they've had to reimagine themselves, and some have done it better than others. And then I look at some of the regional malls and some of what's happening in that sector and the incredible changes that are occurring with some of those regional town centers like Burnaby, Richmond, Surrey, and others. There has been no uptake of interest and space from the retail sector into moving back into those spaces once they've been reimagined. So I think it just speaks again to the resilience of that industry and that sector for the rebound that's coming.
Yeah, Jason, just on the same vein, Jason, do you think the kind of shift in the reimagination in retail, COVID really accelerated that retail change that was already coming? I mean, we'd sat on many a panel as we went through 2017, 2018, 2019, and talked about the emergence of Amazon in the market, the emergence of e-commerce, but that Canada was always trailing the US in terms of the kind of sales per capita through e-commerce, and maybe kind of COVID forced that catch up.
100%. I mean, we were forced to shop from home, and people who hadn't started doing that did. And then we saw new product categories where we had only, kind of scratched the surface, starting to be bought online, and those companies had to sort of play catch up in terms of their e-commerce strategies, in particular food. Mm-hmm. But I'd heard from many, large brands, multinational clients that you think would have had, their things in order for e-commerce, that that summer of 2020, their board got together and said, we need to figure out our e-commerce strategy, supply chain, everything, and within 90 days. Like, the amount of demand is overwhelming, and it's probably a more expensive venture to do it that way, but we need to figure out our web platform, where we're delivering from, transportation strategy, all that kind of stuff. And it was all hands to get that sorted out as a result of the adoption. And if you look at, I think Darrell has this information, but the adoption rate to Canada is now, on par with the US. The UK, I think, is a bit higher, and so there is runway still, but huge growth in that sector. Yeah,
perfect. What I want to be able to do is just dive into both our industrial and our office sectors in a little bit more detail. I did want to mention to everybody who's listening, there's a Q&A component on the bottom of your screens. If there's any questions you want to ask either Jason or Darrell or collectively to the panel, feel free to put those questions in. I'll try to pick those up, collate them, and try to get some questions to the group either through the presentation or towards the back end. Thank you very much on that. So let's dive in a little bit more specifically, and let's start with office. Jason, I'd like you to take the lead and maybe just walk us through some of the CBRE research, set the table for us, if you will, around the office sector.
Yeah, so we can actually just start on the next slide, but the overarching theme right now in the office market is it's so much better than what you may be hearing in the news media. And the sense I'm getting right now with the amount of activity that's in the market is that our office market has a potential to sort of really turn on a dime this spring and summer, and our vacancy rate to be significantly lower than it's showing right now. So overall, sort of the trends from our Q4 numbers, the vacancy rate for Metro Vancouver declined for the first time since 2020 in Q4. So it declined about 40 basis points from almost 7.5% to 7%. Interesting trend throughout the last couple of years, because there's been a lot of talk of sort of lack of demand in the office sector. Rental rates never really came off very much. And now with that decline in vacancy rates, they're actually at the highest point that they've ever been for both downtown and suburban. And then, vacancies at 7%, but if you look at certain product types, whether it's class of building, size of space, there's an extreme lack of supply in some instances there, which will drive up, rates and just a lack of overall availability. Going into, it started in 2021, but then this year and next year, we have the largest amount of under construction product for downtown Vancouver, and definitely with the way the office market was playing out the last 2 years, people were really wondering what's the effect going to be as that new product comes to market. But it's a positive story right now. And as I was mentioning, the activity that we're hearing about with the amount of large occupiers in the market has the ability to really change the narrative in a short period of time. So those are sort of the overarching themes, and I'll present a few slides that just back that information up.
Mm-hmm.
We can go to the next one. So, historical vacancy and absorption, this is for all of Metro Vancouver office space. You can see 2020, we had that significant negative absorption. The dark gray is the new supply coming to market. So from basically 2020 forward, we were delivering new supply with very limited absorption. That changed late last year, Q3 2021. The absorption actually matched the new supply, and from there, absorption's been growing as supply deliveries are less than that. So that's why we're now seeing that decrease in the vacancy rate as of Q4. We can go to the next slide. This is showing on the lines the downtown vacancy rate and the suburban vacancy rate. Interesting trend that played out last year is that for the first time ever, the suburban vacancy rate was lower than downtown vacancy. And that was the question we got a lot was, will we see more demand in the suburbs as companies potentially decouple or have a secondary location? I don't know that there's a ton of examples of that yet, but it's definitely a trend that we're watching for. We do also anticipate moving forward with the amount of demand downtown Vancouver that this will normalize back to the downtown vacancy rate being lower than the suburban markets over the next several quarters. And
sorry, Jason, the only thing I was going to add to that is I think we've already started to see evidence of that, right? We've seen an uptick in some of the sublease markets in suburban markets and a decline downtown. And obviously through COVID, we saw the flight to the suburbs for people who were tired of living in smaller condos. And that drove, the business decisions as to where to operate and locate. And I think that's why the suburbs fared as well as it did. And that trend is now reversing with some of the activity that you just described.
Yeah, and it's hard to paint the suburbs as one market, right? If you look at on transit, certain locations, I'm sure it's next to near zero vacancy, right? So
I think the other thing that we need to remember, I was speaking to a friend of mine whose daughter works in London, was excited because she'd changed jobs and had reduced her commute from 1.5 hours to 1 hour. And, we still are a relatively small community in terms of commute times, and obviously infrastructure provides that support. Just add some color as we're going through this. I mean, who are the groups taking up the space? Is it new groups? Is it existing groups? Vancouver always used to be softly criticized as not being a head office town. Are we seeing that change, or our head office is really a thing of the past and it's global presence for companies?
I think we're seeing a lot of growth of companies that are located here. There's big brands that are sort of US headquartered that maybe were a small presence here and have grown exponentially because of the ability to get a labor force to this market versus into the US through immigration. So that's really benefiting. But lot of large deals done by gaming companies, obviously high tech, and then sort of moving around of business services firms that were already here, but maybe looking to expand or upgrade the space that they're in.
Yeah, and I also think too that, and we were seeing this pre-COVID, was a lot of major firms downtown were looking to take some of their back office functions and relocate them to the suburbs in an effort to reduce costs of their overall footprint. And I think that was partially what we saw through COVID, that was accelerated. And I don't know that trend is going to cease anytime soon. I still think that with the rise in costs that we continue to see downtown, the potential for breaking new barriers in all classes of buildings, that may continue. But it will be focused on transit-oriented locations. I agree with you there, Jason.
So no, Jason, I know you had some data about what it kind of looks like over the next year or so out, and what's coming on market and what's getting absorbed.
Yeah, so that's sort of the last slide. I can touch on sort of the new development pipeline, and you'll see some of the tenants that have taken the space that aren't pre-lease. We can just quickly flip to the next one. This is the forecast, yeah, talking about that new supply cycle that's coming, but to the point there, Paul, I believe we're something like 60 or 70% pre-leased on the new builds downtown from 2021 to 2023. And so that question mark about, well, is vacancy going to keep going up with all this new supply? The answer is no. So we modeled, if we take out what is already pre-leased, worst case, we only achieve 15% pre-leasing on the remainder. That's that more yellow line. And if we do 40% of the remaining pre-leasing, that's continuation of the green line. Both are below 6%. So back to really a landlord's market.
Yeah, just maybe between yourself and Darrell, you can pipe in. We've become, and my background's industrial, and so we've, the new normal is sub 1% vacancy. Just remind us what a healthy market is in terms of vacancy.
Well, I think it's debatable. I think many would argue that balanced market is somewhere between 8 and 10%. I would argue that it may be even lower than that. But 100% agree with Jason. I think where we're trending is, on the heels of some of this major activity, which is being driven by the tech sector, but there will be a trickle-down effect. But as soon as some of those major requirements land, we could be back to pre-COVID vacancy levels, potentially even sub 3%. And that's going to have a major impact, not only on pricing, but also on the rest of the sectors, be it financial, professional services, what have you. And that may cause a further flight to the suburbs from some of those industries that we may classify as have-nots. But we could be experiencing some of what the industrial market has seen over the last few years in record low vacancy levels. And it's definitely, in my view, going to spur on further development activity and may accelerate some of the projects that are in the next building cycle.
And I think to your point about a balanced market, I mean, we're talking about, there's caution because we're 6-7%. We remained the lowest vacancy rate of any major market in North America through COVID, in this being showing that it's a high lease rate, but industrial and office, both markets, we're just so supply constrained, right? So what looks bad to us is a non-issue in most other markets.
So keep rolling forward, because I know you've got this pipeline piece you wanted to share.
Yeah, so we can go to the next slide. So this was just digging into sort of some of the specific areas where we're lacking supply. So anything over 50,000 square feet, you've got 5 options. 3 of them are in new builds. there's activity on many of those spaces, so that you could be down to, very limited options over 50,000 square feet pretty quickly here. We can go to the next one.
Just a real quick comment there, Jason, on that last slide. I mean, I think if there are headwinds that exist, it's in that B and C class sector with requirements or areas that are less than 10,000 square feet. With the continued trend of flight to quality, driven largely by the employee and making sure that there's engagement there and that they want to return to the office. I think companies will continue to look for better quality space with better amenities and just overall better platforms. And that's gonna hurt those B and C class buildings, which is going to cause owners of that type of product to have to reinvest significantly to make those spaces competitive.
Yeah, it's a good point.
And what's the kind of this growth in office downtown? What's that going to do, in your opinions, to over the next couple of years to residential? It was suggested in some data, and there was data was shared with me this morning that in Bellevue, where we, which is this tremendous tech hub in Seattle, the residential is now 1,700 a square foot easily. We're arguably still $1,100-1,200 a square foot residentially in and around the downtown core. So is that going to push on it? Is it going to push on a residential sector and encourage more people to build? And also, is there concern when we're talking to these tenants coming in that there's just not the depth of employees in this market?
Yeah, I mean, so a couple items there. One, on the housing, I think it has to put upward pressure on your downtown market for both condo and rental. We're already in a shortage of supply. You start bringing these employees from other markets to move here. Maybe many of them want to rent versus buy because they don't know how long they're going to be here. Yeah, we don't have enough product, and I think it's going to put upward pressure on both rents and condo prices. And then the second piece, is just around getting labor here, and it's about, I guess, getting the borders back opened up and immigration turned back on to help with the labor issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you ask the development community, there was the UDI panel a couple of weeks ago where they spoke to, they are already seeing those prices increase. With the cost of land and the cost of materials and labor, they can't afford to build condos at $1,100 a foot. Some of these new projects, whether it's Boza or whether it's West Bank and others, they need well into the 2,000 square foot in order for those to pencil. And it seems, based on their comments, that that is that the market is now driven no longer by the investor market offshore, but it's the local market, and there's a higher level of owner occupiers. So presumably people that are getting out of their North Shore or West Side homes and simplifying lives and moving into these types of developments. And as Jason correctly said, by virtue of lack of supply and that demand increasing, I think that those condo developers will do very well over the next few years. And that's going to fuel residents living downtown. With Canada opening up immigration laws and back to more significant numbers, that's going to help. And I think we're going to see the residential market drive forward and also drive the demand for office space downtown. Certainly there's a number of developers that are going long in that, Quadrille being one of them with the Post, and just yesterday's announcement of HBC's real estate adding potentially 1 million square feet to the top of the Hudson Bay. So that's significant. People don't go long on those kinds of decisions without seeing population growth, particularly downtown.
And where does that with even just those two projects talked about and a continued growth in office, where is that going to take our office lease rates, and what kind of packages are landlords having to put in front of tenants right now? And certainly if where with vacancy rate a little higher, quite often landlords have to put more on the table, but if vacancy rates are going to drift lower, does that mean landlords are putting less on the table and asking for greater rates? Jason.
Yeah, I mean, in recent conversations, it sounds like the lease rates on new builds are back to where they were, like, into the 50s pre-pandemic. Maybe there were some higher TIs offered over the past couple of years, and I think those are starting to be reduced as people don't necessarily need to, buy a deal. So I think you're going to see lower TIs moving forward, and I think there's a lot of room in escalation for our face rates here, especially compared to some of the other major markets.
Yeah, I think the question really needs to be asked is what is the next barrier, and when will it be seen? I can remember years where we talked about $50 a square foot not being achievable, and now it's commonplace to see renewals and new leases, particularly in the new build inventory, reach $60. So how far away can $70 a square foot be? I would predict that it's probably not that far off, and that there are some developers out there who are banking on rates getting even higher. And when you look comparatively to markets like New York, San Francisco, within North America, and then globally in markets like Tokyo and Sydney, Australia, there's room for growth here in Canada, and particularly in Vancouver.
Fabulous. I mean, those big tech occupiers that are looking here and are comparing Seattle and some of the other markets, you've got the currency in their favor. The cost of labor here is lower. The cost of real estate is lower. It becomes a very appealing opportunity. So a little bit more on the face rate, I don't think is a big deal for them.
Yeah, well, there's no question that some of the policies south of the border as it relates to immigration over the last 4 or 5 years have certainly made Canada not just geographically, but from a destination, from a work destination and a welcoming destination, a place where qualified migrants are looking to move to, and I think that's fantastic. Jason, can I move you along to and just kind of wrap up the slide piece that you have, because I know that last slide is quite fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's the next one. So yeah, this is the new build cycle starting with last year through to 2023, everything that's expected to deliver and the amount of pre-leasing that's occurred and who the occupiers are of those buildings. Interesting, over 200,000 square feet leased or under contract during the COVID period. 72% of this new build cycle is committed to. And there's a good significant amount of that space that is new entrants to the market or significant growth from tenants that aren't headquartered here. So it's a positive news story for sure.
Fabulous.
And I think just to add to that, Jason, we did a rough calculation with our office group. They estimate there's probably 2 million square feet of requirements in the market today that haven't been accounted for in this inventory. And so that's, I think that's going to change the landscape dramatically when those play out.
Definitely.
So if I've got 2,000 square feet, it's really quite insignificant. 2,000 square feet vacancy. Darrell, I'm going to move along the conversation to industrial. Darrell's just talked about some comfortably $50, $70 lease rates on the office side. We're going to go into industrial, and I am going to ask the question: are we going to see $1,000 a square foot strata pricing in industrial, and are we going to see north of $20 lease rates in industrial on a consistent basis moving forward? So Darrell, why don't you kind of control the screen for a bit and give us a bit of a walkthrough on industrial?
Yeah, happy to do so. If you want to jump right into the next slide. So it's always great to be part of the feel good story, and couldn't imagine pre-pandemic sitting here in February 2022 talking about lease rates in the industrial sector that have already reached well into the mid-20s, and who knows where it can go. I think what this why I wanted to just start with this the slide presentation with this is it really kind of illustrates how flat and stagnant our rental growth was in 2010 to 2015, and the acceleration really started to be witnessed in that period of 2015 to 2020 when we saw 72% rate growth and sale prices increased by a whopping 86%. And that's just continued on in a shorter period of time, anecdotally from 2020 to today. So we are seeing lease rates not, I wouldn't say consistently across the board, but there are certainly many examples in the marketplace today, Paul, where we're hearing 25 to, escalations beyond that. And prices per square foot are phenomenal. Here we are with, we talked about at the very beginning, kind of record-setting territory for the industrial market. 2021 was an abundance of those records, where we saw a historically low vacancy rate, now at sitting currently at 0.4%.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, did you want to add anything to that from your side?
No, you covered that well. I think just to Paul's question at the beginning there on pricing, I think you have to decouple, I guess, sort of the strata projects that are in Mount Pleasant, South Van, because they're probably close to 1,000, if not there already.
Yeah.
But into the Fraser Valley, I think, we kind of have been half jokingly saying, when are we going to be at $1,000? Is it this year? And we're definitely north of 700 now already into those valley markets, which is a huge growth over the last year. And then rental rates depends on size again, but we're hearing a lot of deals in the 20s already.
Yeah. Let me ask you a quick question on rental rate. I mean, this graph highlights, if you did a 10-year deal in 2014, you've been sitting on the bench watching a pretty exciting market and not being able to get on the ice, if you will. Are you finding landlords are looking to do shorter lease terms to try to take advantage of escalations? How's the market reacting to this kind of lift?
I think landlords would prefer to do shorter term deals and be able to get at the space again in a few years. But the big change in our market maybe 5 years ago was the introduction of, here's your year one rate, and we want it to escalate by somewhere between 3 and 5% annually to help cover some of this escalation. There's also the question, it's grown, that's 72%, and then 24. Can it keep growing at that sort of rate? I don't know. Will it plateau, at some point? Probably. There's still room to run the next year or two, and then you look at some other big markets in the US, and they're at rates, comparable to us or higher on large format deals. What are people doing? I think landlords would prefer to do a shorter deal and try to get at the space. Tenants are trying to renew early because I think they see the path to more rental rate growth, and they'd rather lock in rates now with that escalation if they can.
Yeah. Darrell, sorry, I was going to say, Darrell, let's keep moving through, but
sure. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. But I don't think there's any question that sticker shock effect for tenants whose leases are rolling over has driven the strata market. And I think the other major disruptors, as everybody on the call today will recognize, is the demand for it within the e-commerce sector. It has fundamentally, transformationally changed our market. And I think from our perspective, we see that continuing. Jason, you brought it up earlier. In other countries such as UK and the US, they have a higher e-commerce penetration, so there's continued room to grow here in Canada. Interesting finding here that e-commerce, requires 3 times the logistics space of the brick and mortar, and is predominantly around access to the consumer. So that has also driven, I think, larger logistics companies to go to more of a hub and spoke model. And even though we have examples of the behemoths like Amazon and others taking massive footprints, it's pushing a lot of others out of the market in those larger buildings into a smaller or mid-size facility, and certainly on the smaller side of things. I think the strata has benefited from people wanting to be able to kind of, at least the thought process, control their own destiny, control costs, and own their real estate, as opposed to being at the mercy of a rising market and the landlord whims. But an interesting.
Darrell, strata, we always understand strata to be smaller bay product. In the bigger bay product, we've also seen escalation in sales price, and $400 a square foot for big bay distribution facilities is not uncommon. Is that taking the owner operator out of that buying group?
That's an interesting question, Paul. I'm not so sure that it has. I think it's a mix. I think if we go to the next slide, we'll start to look at some of the illustrations and statistics around our strata market. Go to the next slide. This not to avoid the question, Paul, but this just, I think amplifies what's driving pricing today, is that this is the new supply cycle, going back to 2010. And you can see in each of the last, 3-year increments that we've increased supply. And yet here we sit today at all-time record low vacancy. And so again, it's a simple matter of supply and demand. But the business operators, they're certainly getting squeezed, which is why I think we are seeing, the flight east, and I think that's going to continue. So markets like Abbotsford and Chilliwack and beyond are going to be the beneficiary. Again, anecdotally, we're starting to see some larger logistics companies actually pick up and move operations into Alberta. We've seen secondary and tertiary markets, the likes of Kelowna and Victoria, be the beneficiary of new development plays and significant logistics 3PL groups moving into those types of markets out of necessity.
I just jump in on your question there, Paul. I don't think it's black and white. There's some entrepreneurial owner-occupiers locally that made the decision to get a piece of the action and own the real estate, and so they're not priced out of the market on those larger purchase assets. But then there's bigger operators that say, well, we have to put our capital into our business. We can't sink that much into real estate. It's not for us. But there's some great success stories of people that own an industrial business and started buying the real estate and leasing it from themselves, and have amassed a great portfolio that way as well.
Yeah, I think the flip to that, if you're an owner operator, you can, outside of taxation and everything else that goes into the mix, but if you can sell your building at a 3 cap, that money then becomes less expensive somewhat than borrowing from financial institutions if you're an opco.
Right.
But
let's go to the next slide, and then we'll continue just highlighting. I thought this was an interesting piece just to show the life cycle, the ecosystem that is strata, and why we are where we are today. Started with rising lease rates as we showed, back in 2015, driving an increased interest in ownership, which drove a scarcity of freestanding buildings. Certainly the low interest rate environment has played a huge role in driving that ecosystem, which spawned increased strata development. And talked a little bit about the owners wanting to avoid the sticker shock and control their costs, and that drives further scarcity of industrial land, and so the wheel continues. Let's move to the next slide. And again, here, this just illustrates, where we are today with record level of industrial sales and pricing. And most on this call will recognize that these are averages and don't speak to the high water marks, which, as Jason alluded, we're already starting to see, $700 a foot in some of the smaller bay opportunities. We're launching phase 2 of marine landing very shortly, and that's going to be the pricing guidance. And so, Paul, I think your question about, $1,000 a foot, I don't know that it's all that far off.
So I guess, a follow-up question with that is, if $1,000 a square foot is not that far off, where does that take land prices? I mean, you hear of Richmond and Delta deals, which are in the multi-million per acre. Is that just going to continue to escalate? I mean, multi-level industrial kind of is here. There's no question about it. Has that model proven out? Is that going to continue to support higher land prices? Well, where do you think it's all going?
Well, I'll take a quick stab at that. I think, more urban, certainly in Vancouver, in Burnaby, possibly, Richmond. I think it's going to be dominated by the strata market. And I think we're going to continue to see more and more of the elevated projects. So 2-3 story industrial buildings, and that continues to drive land prices. So if we go to the next slide, this is kind of dollar volume, so record level of dollar volume, and let's go to the next slide. This is where you talk about the price per acre. So again, the devil's always in the details. Data doesn't always tell the full story. We're seeing, average pricing for land at this level now, which is a record. But we have also seen transactions occur where pricing is above $5,000 an acre, and there was a recent trade where it was about $10,000 an acre. So those are fewer and far between, but just with the scarcity of land, I don't think that there's an end in sight to upward pressure on land prices and the delivery. Let's face it, there is a bottleneck here. It needs to be accounted for somehow. Strata is going to likely drive that to try to ease that bottleneck, and that's going to continue to put upward pressure.
Just to touch on the build forms as well, saying multi-story, I think it can mean a lot of things. In the city of Vancouver, you've got several level small bay strata. That concept is proven out. You've got what Oxford did in South Burnaby. So in different areas, different concepts work. We're hearing, other uses, right? Parking on the roof so that you can make more use of the actual land site. Large format users going super clear height, 80 plus feet, and then building out systems within the facility to make more use of the cubic space. And they also have a big parking requirement. So it's kind of this, how do you get the most out of the site, and that is helping drive the land prices so people can make sense of them.
And is that, Jason, in your opinion, the definition of industrial has changed? And whether it's biotech, e-commerce, as we move forward, some of the smaller industrial that's being built closer in. If you were to describe industrial today, how would you present that? And how do you see that evolving by way of users more than anything over the next short while?
Yeah, the definition has definitely widened in scope of what we consider industrial. It's not, factories and things like that it used to be. There's a few ways to look at it, right? Like what is moving through the warehouse now, the amount of product that would have typically been in a retail store is actually now sitting in a warehouse and shipping direct. So, that e-commerce retailization of industrial is a term that's been thrown around, right? And that I think is helping drive what lease rate you can pay, what are you doing within the industrial warehouse. And then, yeah, you layer on these new uses to a market that's already so low vacancy. And now you've got groups like film or life sciences or these alternative new uses that, may be able to pay a higher price or rental rate for industrial space. And that is just putting more and more pressure on the industrial market and redefining what industrial is exactly.
Yeah, I certainly know some of the government relations work that NAIOP does, works with local municipalities to help them understand the quickly evolving marketplace to make sure their definition of industrial keeps up with the actual users, and we don't end up with users going in to pull business licenses and going, well, we really don't have a use clause that covers that type of use. Darrell, is that your sense as well? Industrial's kind of changed, it's evolved. How are you crystal balling things in your discussions?
I don't think there's any question. We've seen tremendous evolution that's been accelerated as a result of COVID, and I see that trend continuing. Maybe we'll go to the next slide. Just continuing on our trend of stats. Again, just wanted to bring to everyone's attention. We saw record volume of sales in both strata. And otherwise, what's interesting is just a reduced number of transactions, but it just speaks to the value of land and building increasing. And
can we just explore that? We've probably only got about 5 minutes left today. But when you see the tragic situation evolving in Eastern Europe late last night, early this morning, and then you look out the window today and look at Vancouver, it is a safe haven. It's such a desirable place to live, such a desirable place to work. Is when we see volumes of sales, obviously underlying values are going up. Are we continuing to see an influx of foreign capital? And do you expect to see more capital flow into this market over the next couple of years as a safe haven?
I can't speak to foreign investment on the industrial side, but I mean, there was a recent transaction that I think hit the market pretty heavily in the GTA with a record sale of a major office building, the RBC Plaza, which was a Spanish investment company, the owner of Zara. So I think if they are looking at office as an asset class, there's no question that other asset classes like industrial and multifamily are soon to follow. Those are traditionally the less riskier of the asset classes. And while they've been at the lowest of the cap rate range as far as investments go, it's certain to follow. I just think that COVID has definitely been an accelerator of the flow of offshore capital into Canada. And from our side of the lens, we don't see that abating anytime soon.
I would just touch on that. For the longest time, the foreign capital narrative was, we want trophy assets downtown, something to put on the front cover of our, corporate brochure. And I'm hearing more conversations around they're looking for industrial specifically and or multifamily. So I do expect, not that we need more players on the investment side of industrial in our market, but I suspect that we will see that. Mm-hmm. And I had one other quick comment just on the zoning topic that came up there, Paul. I think municipalities and our group should actually be looking at widening the scope of the retail zoning. And the reason I say that is that there's a lot of industrial companies that are looking to do infill delivery and could make use of some of the retail space that's been sitting vacant in core locations, but they don't fit within the retail zoning. And I think that's an opportunity.
Well, we're certainly seeing stories in the US of core malls shifting some of their upper levels into office and converting, and indeed converting to biotech and labs, because retail traditionally has that kind of higher ceiling component to their design, which fits into the biotech space. Darrell, why don't I let you continue here? Just kind of mindful, we've just got a few minutes to make sure.
Thanks, Paul. I definitely want to be mindful and respectful of everybody's time. So I think we're nearing the end. Maybe we can just flip to the next slide. And this ends the presentation with just commentary around cap rate compression on industrial, again, trending down. And while there are some headwinds on the horizon, notably with potential interest rate environment increasing, I'm not sure how much of the steam in this market it's going to take out of it. It's still, again, from a historical perspective, relatively low. So even 3/4 point bumps is still keeps us at historically very low levels. And I think that those can be absorbed within the industrial market. And again, the unfortunate piece is it gets passed on to the consumer, but I think there's room to grow. But anyway.
We talked about this earlier as well. I mean, the real estate community in Vancouver, there's pretty low leverage anyway, right? So I don't know how big of an effect interest rates will have on that side of the coin.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you one question, which was just posed by one of the people watching. Is there any concern, or the question posed is, do you think the government will step in and try to bring in any laws, policies to tamper down pricing around commercial real estate the same way it has in residential real estate? And I kind of temper that with, dear God, no, but question posed.
Well, the question that I would ask in return is, how effective do we think it was on the residential side of the market? And I would argue that it did some damage initially, but prices have continued to escalate. So the last thing we need is intervention, more intervention by government circles. I think that's an impediment to our market. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's wrap up with this. If you had $1 and you were a wagering individual, a gambling person, what's the one thing you suggest to your closest colleagues that's going to happen this year, and do the old mark my word, you're going to see X? Jason?
I'd say it's further growth in industrial strata pricing.
Are you ready to put your dollar on?
Put my $1 down. That's my big bet.
Put your dollar down on that 1,000 threshold in kind of that medium bay strata.
That seems like a lot to me. I don't know if I'd say that this year, but I'd definitely say significant growth still on strata pricing. And that's vague. So maybe 20-25%.
Darrell?
I'm an office guy at heart, and I put my dollar on continued rebound in the office sector. I do think we're going to go back to pre-COVID levels of vacancy, and I think we're going to see continued demand in that sector as we return to the office. I think that's been a short-lived experiment, which has proven to work initially, and it probably saved a lot of us from having worse results through the virus. But I think people are over it. People want to get back to the office. I think the hybrid model is going to continue to evolve, and I just think demand is going to continue to drive into the office sector, and we're going to see some significant growth. We're going to see the announcement of a couple of new buildings in the next cycle, and I think we're going to see the existing cycle fill up to more normalized levels very quickly.
So even though we decided we speak to the asset classes we didn't work in, we defaulted back to that on our bets.
We kind of did, didn't we?
Yeah. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. I've got some good, some great, and some super news just to share with everybody who's listened in today. The good news is that this webinar was recorded and is going to be made available through our website. The great news is all of the materials that we went through fairly quickly will also be available because the materials will be much more interesting watching the three of us one more time. But the super news is that on April 21st, we will be back to live breakfasts through NAIOP. And we've got a very exciting panel set up to look at the investment market here in Metro Vancouver. So look for upcoming news on that, but please mark in your calendars 8 a.m. on the 21st of April. Details to be provided. So again, Jason, Darrell, fascinating conversation. We could go on much longer, but we're kind of respecting everybody who's participating in this and moving on. Lunch breaks are over, if you will. Look forward to finding the opportunity to revisit this discussion. It is an exciting time and continues to be an exciting time in the commercial real estate sector here in Metro Vancouver and British Columbia, indeed in Canada. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank everybody who participated. I also want to thank both Eva Marie and Paul back at our NAIOP office who've been working through the slides and put this together. And again, just a great heartfelt thank you to all of our sponsors who stood by this organization and continue to allow us to do the work we're doing on behalf of our membership and behalf of the broader industry. May I wish everybody a very good Thursday afternoon. Thank you.